Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis, and I'm probably the only person you know that had an office at Ole Miss and has worked in the national media. Thanks for joining us. We're here with Pratt Rogers right now. We're going to talk a little Deion Smith, some transfer portal. We're going to talk some Gavin Griffin because that's who I'm obsessing with at the moment. And then we'll talk Peach Bowl. How we doing, Pratt?
Good, Steven. Appreciate it, man. A lot of good news today.
Very good news. Listen, I don't want to toot my own horn, right?
Well, of course not. We would never do something like that.
Yeah. For most of the season, I watched Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. That was my good luck ritual. And then I did it before the Georgia game, and Ole Miss got boat race. So I didn't do it for Louisiana Monroe, and I didn't do it for Mississippi State. But going into this weekend, I was like, you know what? Let's try it one more time. Let's see if that good luck, if there's actually good luck that can happen. I watched that movie on Friday, and on Saturday, they beat Memphis in one of the best basketball games that they've had in recent history. Ole Miss gets the Peach Bowl, and they get a commitment from Deion Smith. I'm kind of stuck with Dial of Destiny at this point.
Well, did you find a 4-leaf clover or a horseshoe somewhere as well? Because that's pretty awesome week, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Like I said, I hate to take credit, but there it is.
That's just part of it.
Yeah, but against Georgia, I tried to get other people to watch it to increase the luck, and that didn't work. Maybe that was the thing. Maybe I need to do this solo.
Yeah,
so we'll see.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I like that.
So Ole Miss got a commitment from Deion Smith, who is the top junior college wide receiver in the country. He's an LSU transfer that dropped down. Basically, he had a story similar to Chris Marshall, except he got his stuff together and worked his way back up from the bottom up. So it's not Ole Miss taking another Chris Marshall. Ole Miss is taking a rehabilitated person. He's a good football player. He's a really good wide receiver. He's averaging about 23 yards a catch, playing in the Holmes Community College offense, to where they basically run tunnel screens, they run hole shots against cover 2, and they send him deep. That is the offense at the moment. He's averaging 22 yards a catch. This is an amazing pickup, and I'll tell you why in a minute, Pratt.
Spill the tea.
I think at this point, and I have an impeccable source on this one, Trey Harris is about 70% coming back to Ole Miss.
No way. Whoa. Yeah. You really did bump into a horseshoe or a 4-leaf clover if you can pull that off.
Yeah. And so you're looking at a wide receiver unit that's probably going to be next year, Deion Smith and Trey Harris.
If that's the case, we really do need to get serious about looking into the playoff picture. I mean, we already have been on that train, Stephen, but I mean, that's big time.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And like I said, I think I was told the way that I could say it is like I have it on good authority. That was the phrasing on that one right there. And I do have it on good authority on that one. But I'm pretty fired up. Now, Ole Miss is going after Jordan Watkins and trying to sew that up. Now, I do not think that Jordan Watkins needs to be overpaid. He's a good football player. He's done amazing stuff, and he's been a good soldier since he's been here. But there's no sense breaking the bank for NIL for a slot receiver. I think Jordan Watkins can come back. I think he can do a mighty fine job, and he'd be a weapon in the middle of the field. But I think that if Deion Smith comes and Trey Harris comes back, all of a sudden, what happens with Aiden Williams? Does Aiden Williams grow up and play on the outside and use Deion Smith as that A.J. Brown type wide receiver, as a slot receiver? I think that is a possibility, kind of like if you do the Dontario Drummond thing with him. We have options at wide receiver is my point.
So, look, I may kind of slightly disagree with you on the Jordan Watkins thing. Obviously, you don't want to ever overpay for a prospect or talent retention or whatever that may be. But, look, Jordan Watkins, even with the broken hand, was probably our most reliable receiver this year. Through thick and thin. And, I think there's a lot to be said for consistency in the world of college football, where there's very little consistency, whether it's roster turnover, coaching changes, getting recruited over, whatever that may be. There's a lot to be said for the one factor that is college that is not college football and its consistency. So look, Jordan Watkins actually would be somebody I think I'd probably stretch the bank for a little bit.
Yeah, and I just think that Deion Smith is actually more of a natural fit in the slot position. So if something happened and Jordan Watkins decided to move on, you're going to not necessarily like for like replace him, but you're going to talent for talent replace him. I mean, Deion Smith is literally a punt returner as well. I mean, so they do a lot of the same stuff. I'd like them both, and I think that Jordan Watkins, you probably do like a cost of living type raise where he gets a little bit more money, but I don't think I would break the bank. But you have to remember, when it comes to people like Quinshon, I'm the person, don't break the bank for a running back. So I'm really weird when it comes to stuff like this.
Well, look, the running back, I think everybody would agree with you on that, and the NFL model of, oh, don't pay running backs and stuff like that. But it's kind of weird that we happen to have one of the best running backs in the nation. So what do? It's almost like a catch-22, so to speak. So look, by the end of his junior season, we're not going to have to worry about this. He'll be in the NFL. We don't have to worry about that bankroll.
He'll own every record that Ole Miss has.
For sure. I mean, I didn't realize how close he was to Deuce's rushing record already. I mean, I had no idea how close he was at all.
Yeah, is this a point right now where if he rushes for 1,000 yards next year, he obliterates the rushing record?
Oh, by like 700 yards, something like
yeah. It's ridiculous. Like the touchdown record, he will legitimately get close to with like a 2 or 3 touchdown game for the career touchdown record through 2 years at Ole Miss. He might have like 1 to go in his junior year. So he is by far the best running back that Ole Miss has ever had.
Yeah, and so look, I completely understand from that perspective. The next guy that comes in is going to be a fraction of that cost. So you really just have to carry that note for another, 12 months. I mean, I think it's almost like a PR thing to where you have to keep him now, because otherwise if Quinshon goes to a different team, you're sitting there, so everybody in the SEC says, oh, we can pick off Ole Miss's best athletes because they have no NIL or they can't pay their athletes or they're unwilling to or whatever that may be. And that almost starts kind of like a fertile hunting ground mentality, so to speak.
Well, I mean, let's be real for a second, okay? Like LSU and Texas A&M, if they can force Ole Miss to get into a bidding war to where they have to pay, like Quinshon gets paid $2 million or something like that, just some astronomical thing where your emotional heartstrings, you keep him. Yeah. The rest of your NIL is going to suffer that. And Texas or Texas A&M probably is going to be able to get a kid or two that they want because Ole Miss is out of the picture. So this is the 4D chess that people are playing right now when it comes to college players.
Yeah, and unfortunately there is that's the emotional capital, so to speak. We get on here a lot and we talk about how some people believe that college football has suffered because there's no, team identity, so to speak. And there's so much roster turnover. Quinshon's a guy who's been here since day one, Lane Kiffin recruit. And, you've got a lot as a fan base vested in him for sure, whether it's monetarily or just like I mentioned, emotional capital.
Lane has done a really good job of one of the tenets of this program and what they want to project is fun. And because of that, you don't get a lot of people that want to get out of it because the place is fun. They do the fire extinguisher. They do a lot of stuff that people can look across the field and see that they don't do. And I think in this transfer portal age, that's actually a little bit of a benefit for Ole Miss.
No doubt. I mean, you can even echo that sentiment based off the fact that Kiffin said the other day he didn't expect anybody to opt out. I mean, the bowl game. One, that may be a talent thing, as he kind of touched on, but 2, it's fun. Like, everybody's a great team player right now. There's no cancer in the locker room. There's nobody that has a me first mentality, at least that we're aware of. We're not in the day-to-day minutia of the locker room, but right now it's cool to be an Ole Miss Rebel,
Yeah, and Penn State has 2 players that are in the top 32 players of the NFL draft potentially on defense, and one of which is opted out for the bowl game already in Chop Robinson. He's a defensive end. He's a guy that only had like 4 sacks and like 7.5 tackles for loss, but that's because they were sliding protections in his direction. And the other end ended up 7 sacks and 15 tackles for loss. They're really salty on the defensive line. They have a good linebacker, and they have a corner that's slated as like the number 31 NFL prospect. So I expect to get word from him that he is probably opting out as well.
Wouldn't be terribly upset to hear that at all.
Yeah,
You kind of mentioned you can get a lot of skewed stats on the D-line like that, just running away from coverage and stuff, or running away from a player, stuff like that. I completely agree with that.
All right, so we're going to get to the portal in just a second, but right now I'm going to bring this name up, and you probably are not going to know anything that I'm talking about because this kid had an offer before today. His offer list was Mississippi Valley, Jackson State, Alcorn State, and the Mississippi JUCO system. That is what he was offered at. His name is Gavin Griffin. He's a running back from Velma Jackson, which is a 1A school. I think it's in Canton, Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And he got up and took Velma Jackson to the state championship game against Biggersville. Velma Jackson would end up losing that game. But in that game, Griffin ran for like 318 yards and 6 touchdowns.
Dang.
He walked out of that. That happened on Ole Miss's field. People were there to see it. All of a sudden this week, there's an offer that goes out for this player. Now, I want to know how well he can catch the ball because at the very least, he looks like he could be whenever he moves, he looks very athlete-like. You're probably a little bit too young to know this, but a Josh Reed type player that I think he could do some work in the slot. But if not in the running back game, man, his lateral movement, Ole Miss's running backs, all of them have great lateral movement. He doesn't have the greatest top end speed, but you couldn't catch him in a phone booth. He can go side to side. I am really impressed with this kid, and this is kind of my obsession that I'm going on right now.
Well, tell me about it size-wise. What does he look like? If you're saying his top end speed's not really his thing, I'm kind of trying to visualize how big the kid
5'11", 190.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah. And
for
1A, yes. He will sign probably in December. And I can't imagine that if this offer exists, I imagine he got offered, and this is what they put in. They said, hey, we're trying to get Kewan Lacey. Can you wait right here until Lacey decides? Yeah. And if Lacey decides no, come on. But it could be a situation where the kid just gets offered because it's just a great story. And we know that, like with Matt Jones, players like that tend to do well in this offense.
Yeah. No, he's been a great testament and a great team player too. No, that's cool. I don't know anything about the prospect, but I'll take a look. So he got his huddle film on his Twitter.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's got 13 minutes of just amazing video.
Sounds like you got pretty deep in the weeds.
Oh today. Yeah, I went down the rabbit hole, something crazy. Whenever I say I kind of got obsessed about it, I'm not joking. So let's turn the page a little bit and talk about this being a little bit of a surprise, the Peach Bowl.
Yeah, no doubt. I was talking to my mom about it, I guess, the day of the selection committee, and I was like, I think the Peach Bowl would be like our third most likely option. I kind of obviously thought citrus, then potentially cotton, and peach was probably my third option. But it was really cool to see the Peach Bowl selection committee freak out on, when they announced that it would be the Ole Miss Penn State game. I don't know if you saw that on social media. Like the CEO of the Peach Bowl or whatever everybody was just like super gassed up about it, which made it cool for me to be like, oh yeah, it's awesome that somebody is really dying to have Ole Miss there and thinks that'll be such a great game too.
Well, it's probably the best non-playoff game in all of the bowl season. I mean, you have two teams with identical resumes. It's almost the same. You have number 10 versus number 11. You've got the really top 5 defense in the country against a really, really explosive offense. There's so many storylines. They just kind of write themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, I think we both kind of mentioned from a game plan perspective, I think I hadn't done a ton of homework on Penn State, but I think it'll be a great game, but I think Ole Miss matches up kind of well against Penn State. I think we had talked about in the past, maybe Texas in the Cotton Bowl or, Iowa in the Citrus Bowl. I think we both kind of agreed that Penn State's a really good matchup for us. I think that'd be a really cool game. So yeah, I'm definitely excited.
Yeah, and it's a great defense. Penn State has a great defense. Penn State fans that are watching this video don't think that we're talking about your defense as being bad, but we would compare it to Texas A&M. That whenever you look at Penn State's defense, I see Texas A&M's defense. Ole Miss put up 500 yards on Texas A&M. Texas A&M had the top defense in the SEC before anybody feels slighted, but Ole Miss did pretty well against that defense. And I think we are either one opt out from the corner. If there's two more that happens, if the corner opts out and the other defensive end, I don't know if he can, but if he does, I think Ole Miss will be in good shape to kind of cook that day.
That would be awesome. Yeah, we have. I think we've solidified tickets now, so I plan on being there with the old man. So super excited about it.
Yeah, should be pretty good. And I tell people all the time that this was kind of like Doctor Strange from Infinity War, where he's sitting there running over the different scenarios and all that of all of that stuff. And there's like, hey, how many scenarios were there? 14 million. How many did we win? One. And this was the one way that Ole Miss was going to make an NY6 bowl game, and that was with Florida State winning the ACC championship and not making the playoffs, and that weird circumstance. So everybody enjoy it. Don't ever anybody say the SEC is out to get you, because they obviously fought for you on this one. And also, by the way, Pratt, 5 teams will be Big Ten teams next year. That's in the New Year's Six this year. Out of the 12, 5 of them, 5 teams will be SEC teams next year.
Wow.
10 of the 12 are SEC or Big Ten teams.
Well, so really, 11, right? Because one's got to be like a G5 team or whatever, right?
Well, the other one's Florida State. So Florida State and Liberty are the
Liberty's
only
the team I'm talking about. Yeah,
but
they're
the only ones that
selection committee qualify one like non-Power 5, right?
Yeah, they have to do it. They get an automatic bid.
And, gotcha up there.
And the ACC gets an automatic bid as well. So you have a situation to where, but it's the Big Two, basically, that era has begun. I mean, that's real. We're going into the 12-team playoffs. So if anybody wants to say, now it won't look exactly like that because automatic bids come to the table, and Texas and Washington are automatic bid recipients that are going to the other conference. But you could easily, I think, see 4 and 4 in the 12-team playoff era.
That would be awesome. It just goes to show that strength of schedule really is important. The best of the best play the best of the best.
And before we get out of here, this is what I want to say. First of all, it was crappy what happened to Florida State.
I agree.
Terrible. Yeah, it was horrible. Also, the committee got it exactly right. You want 2 games that are going to be good and competitive and all of that, and have 4 teams that have a chance to win the national championship. Florida State's not in that list.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I know you and I hadn't talked about that, but I feel bad for the kids and, the coach and I didn't really love the athletic director firing off like that, but it is a tough scenario, a tough pill to swallow. If that happened to Ole Miss, I would be writing pretty nasty emails to somebody, I'm sure.
Yeah. And like I said, the BCS, by the way, when it was completely computer done and there was no committee, Auburn got left out in 2004. So that isn't a system that's going to protect anybody either. The problem was having 4 spots available for 5 teams. Yeah. And this was always going to happen. Statistically, it had to happen. And Florida State was the team that got. Also, the ACC, Big Ten, and Pac-12, they formed the alliance, and this year was supposed to be a 12-team playoff. The first year of the 12-team playoff, and all of these problems would have been resolved. None of them would have happened. The alliance is probably more to blame. Get mad at the committee all you want to, fine. It's their job to take arrows to get the best matches on the field. But look, don't treat the symptoms. Realize that this year happened because there were 4 spots for 5 teams, and they did their part to try and take care of the big bad SEC. by slowing down the playoff and allowed that not to happen until next year. They took a pause on it. It was supposed to happen this year. If that would have happened this year, Florida State would have played Liberty in a home playoff game and gotten their reward.
So, yeah, well, look, I'm selfishly glad it didn't happen this year. We'll take the small victory and keep moving.
Although
forward.
we would have been going to the horseshoe if it would have happened this year.
You think so?
Oh yeah. If you look at the rankings, it would have been Ohio State.
That would have been pretty awesome, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. But hey, we get Penn State, so I guess that's pretty close.
Yeah. Ohio State would have been pretty awesome too. Yeah.
In that situation, Penn State would have gotten Georgia in the first round.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, it's going to be awesome. I can't wait until next year at this time to see what's going on, especially if Ole Miss is going to get to have one of those. And Ole Miss is looking at potentially a home playoff game, and they're recruiting a lot of guys in the portal, and some big names have popped up in the portal. And Ole Miss is trying to improve that roster just a little bit. And honestly, all good names are happening. Now, there's a little bit slow on the offensive line, although there's some interior offensive linemen that could pop in the next couple of days, next couple of weeks. But some of the skill players that hit the portal, it's nice that Ole Miss is not in that Jackson Dart realm where they have to go $2 million to buy a quarterback.
Yeah.
They just need to find their most expensive thing will be a rush in. And I keep seeing rush ins getting retweeted by Kelvin Bolden and Lane Kiffin, and Walter Nolan is in the portal.
Man, that would be so awesome.
Yeah, he's originally from Olive Branch, so
I know.
I classify Ole Miss as having a puncher's chance in that situation.
Look, no doubt. I know he's kind of a floater in high school. I remember he went to 4 different high schools in 4 years. But man, that I know that would be just from a PR perspective or a enthusiasm perspective, somebody that a lot of Mississippi people know and would want, even just for the name brand itself,
Listen, I'm going to be dead honest about this. And this is kind of my hot take. With the addition of Walter Nolan, Ole Miss goes from being in the conversation for the college football playoff to being in the conversation for a home game in the college football playoff.
That's insane to think, but it's not insane based off the position that he plays, honestly. I mean, it's crazy to think that one player can make that much of a difference, but if it's anybody, it's him,
Yeah. Picture this, Xavier Harris becomes a depth piece in that scenario.
Well, look, I think I've always said what separates the Georgias and the Bamas are their rotation on the lines, the depths on the offensive and defensive line. If you have a third string defensive line that's still stout and, plays good football, then you sit there and you're a deadly team all of a sudden. That's the biggest, I guess, separator between an Ole Miss and a Georgia or an Alabama, those top tier teams. I've always thought it's the depth on the lines, and bringing in somebody like Walter Nolan immediately boots everybody down a notch. So anyway, our starters become secondary. Yeah.
And listen to this, everybody. And I'm going to be the only person at this point that is saying this, but part of every one of Ole Miss's recruiting pitches for transfer players is next year we compete for the playoff. Yeah. We're there with or without you. With you, we might be at an even higher level than we are right now. And that is something that not many people can recruit to. That is an advantage that Ole Miss actually has, and that'll help with players like Walter Nolan and some of these big name players. So we'll see exactly what happens there.
Well, fingers crossed. I'm excited. Definitely a lot of big names popping up. Stuff to keep an eye on and stuff to be excited about.
Yeah, and this weekend, Chris Paul is visiting. Actually, I was the one that broke that. But he's a good linebacker. I call him the perfect linebacker for a Pete Golding system. And he is. He's 233 pounds, 6'1", but he's athletic enough to go sideline to sideline. He's more of a thumper version of Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste. And
Golding loves that size. You and I have talked about it before. He loves that size of linebacker. I'm not surprised to hear you say that at all.
Yeah, it should be really interesting, and we'll see what happens when he comes to visit. Could be a situation everything goes well and he commits by the end of the weekend. I mean, it's that far down the road, I think. Just judging and reading tea leaves a little bit, but we'll see exactly what happens. Just getting him to campus this quickly is a coup for Lane Kiffin and Pete Golding.
For sure.
Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Pratt Rogers, thank you very much, man, for joining us, man. We'll talk to you next week, bud.
Thank you, buddy. See ya. Hotty toddy.
Hotty toddy.